first meeting of the Growth and Natural Resources Committee for Raleigh City Council. Welcome, Council Committee members. Great to be with you today. And we are going to start off with some staff presentations. After that, we will have opportunity for public comment and then discussion by our council members. If anyone, though, on the committee has questions as we go along, please jump in so that we're all on the same page. Again, the focus of this particular committee meeting is on the Dix Edge study. We have also two rezoning cases. We may not get to the last one on our docket, but hopefully we'll make it through the general realm of everything here on the agenda. All right, to Tansy.
Thank you. So we have Bynum Walter with Planning and Development. She will go through an overview of the Dix Edge study, including some of the community engagement and the process that went into that plan in a little more detail than you heard at the council table, as well as the recommendations of the plan. There was some question at the council table on January 24th about the reconciliation between those changes in the comprehensive plan and the planning document. So she'll also walk you through the crosswalk between some of the recommendations in the plan, those things that were recommended as changes in the comprehensive plan, and why some other elements didn't result in specific recommendations.
Thank you, Bynum Walter, Planning and Development. It's great to be with you. Okay, here we go. So here's what I want to talk about today: the comprehensive plan amendments that are recommended coming out of the area study. A little bit deeper dive about the area-specific guidance and the future land use map and transitions. There were some questions around that, and also some thoughts about how this relates to city-initiated Z5322. So, a reminder that the engagement in the Dix Edge planning process, I would say in the 10 years I've been with the city, this was our most robust and had the most depth. We worked really, really hard to step our game up on this and to bring forward practices to future efforts. It certainly was a model for other projects that were going on at the time, Capitol, Midtown, and projects that are just getting going now. So we had a community leader group. We also had neighborhood ambassadors. We are still using that model in the city. We're calling those community connectors now. It's very successful for this project. We see that it's translatable to a lot of other things. We did a lot of partnership work with local nonprofits and schools. We live streamed our meetings. We had huge survey responses. We spent a lot of time on the bus to get survey responses that really helped us improve the diversity of demographics for responses. Typically, we see a older, whiter, more affluent response online, and so getting on the bus really helped us diversify that. We worked with businesses in the project area. We spent a ton of time in Eliza Pool Park. That was a great place, a great kind of community mixing bowl to interact with folks, share information. We did yard signs in English and in Spanish. We also did door hangers. Yard signs, we got a ton of response to. We knew people were responding to the signs in particular. The door hangers, I gotta say, really just freaked out our neighbors. They did not like it when we came up on the porch and knocked on the door and fiddled with their door handle to hang a thing there. So our takeaway there is that yard signs are more effective, better received, and they're also, in terms of sort of the return you get, and related to how much time and effort it takes, much better return for effort.
Can I ask, how do you know this yard signs work? There was like a
phone number and email, and we were getting responses through those signs. And also in the surveys we were circulating, we were asking people, how did you hear about us? And they were telling us the yard signs. Yeah. Which is really helpful, right, to all of us. We had more than 300 public participants in live events, 27,000 website interactions. We had 28 workshop events. Those door hangers, I love them. I think I'm really glad we tried it, but I don't think they're super effective. And then we did 5 surveys for this project.
So do you have any insight to the demographic breakdown of all of the responses with respect to like income, age, and or race?
I don't have that at hand now. We did, going into the project, evaluate the demographics of the project area, and we were looking at that in relationship to the responses that we were getting where folks were reporting. So a lot of times folks don't report demographics. We get a lot of very anonymous responses. But that was part of why we were riding the bus, was we were trying to diversify the responses that we were getting because we knew it wasn't particularly representative. And so we were really pushing hard to improve that as the project was going on. And I feel like we ended up in a good place. I'd have to go back and look at those numbers. Of course, I'd be happy to hunt that detail down for you, but I feel like we ended up in a very good place.
I would love to see that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. We do that for all our projects where we evaluate demographics at the outset. That's how we, that's part of how we make selection around community leaders and community ambassadors, because we want those groups and those individuals to reflect the community. So really trying to make sure that the leadership that we're presenting to the community looks like the community, but also that we have some idea of what our targets should be in terms of evaluating what kind of response we're getting and who that's coming from and how it relates to who's in the project area. Yeah. I mean, how else would you know if you were doing it right? Yeah, yeah. So getting back to what we heard from the community, folks were really focused on being able to get around by walking and biking, very interested in housing affordability, and very concerned about displacement of current residents. And so those were really the top three coming out of the community. And that's very much reflected in the plan, and I feel like it's very much reflected in the comprehensive plan amendments that were then brought forward to adopt. So remember, the plan document is quite long. We pull out the essence of that that's most relevant to evaluating rezonings and that is most specific to that particular place to come into the comprehensive plan to be adopted, codified there. Codified's not the right word because it's not a code. Documented there, sorry. There are a lot of topics in the comprehensive plan amendment. I want to focus on the ones in green today because that's where you've had the most conversation at the table and heard the most questions from the community. Those are around affordability, natural resources, land use, and the future land use map. So affordability, what's in the plan, our policies around expanding housing opportunities at all income levels, a focus on long-term affordability, on city-owned property, and on ongoing engagement. And there are a couple of actions there around educational services and heritage and cultural committee. On the natural resources front, the policies focus on environmental sustainability, green stormwater infrastructure, and there are a couple of actions tied to trail networks and stream and wetland signage. And then on land use, the policies are related to building height, greenway-oriented development, and urban frontages. And the actions there are the city-initiated rezoning, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a minute, and also greenway-oriented development. So I want to talk a little bit about the future land use map amendment that goes with that future land use, the land use policy I was just talking about. So there are a couple of amendments that change some areas in the project area from low scale to moderate scale residential. So if you look at this map, you can see where these lighter yellow, where's my little, I want this thing. There we go. So these lighter yellows turn darker down here because they're going from low to moderate. Pick a new color. And then the higher scale residential, which is just this brown area right along Lake Wheeler Road, adjacent to Dix Park, would go from that higher scale residential to regional mixed use. So that's moving away from residential only to a more mixed use expectation of range of uses. The office and residential mixed use area along Saunders Street is recommended to go to regional mixed use. So a recognition or a desire to cultivate a little bit more retail, more broader use of commercial space in that area. And then the public parks and open space just in this little band of the 1500 South Wilmington Street would change to medium-scale residential. That's a policy recommendation of this plan in anticipation of the rezoning that we'll talk about. So I want to just offer you some images about what these policy words mean. So low-scale residential looks about like you would think it would. Single-family houses, those can range in scale. Lot size can also vary a bit. Moderate-scale residential, you're seeing a little bit more density, maybe a smaller average lot size per unit, maybe more units on a lot. Higher-scale residential is just getting taller, right? We expect greater height. And then regional mixed use, you would expect height. You would also expect office and retail commercial type uses on the ground floor, in addition to residential uses possibly. And then a mix in those upper stories of residential and non-residential uses. I wanted to just, we went out with Councilmember Fort and Ms. Franklin from Partners for Environmental Justice for site visit a couple weeks ago. And as we were leaving, we drove past this and I stopped to take a picture. So this is a picture of 114 and 118 Summit Avenue in 2019. There you can see two small scale single-family homes on either side of a vacant lot. In 2022, there was a really big new house built between those two small houses. And now one of those small houses has been torn down, and there are two really big houses side by side. And I think this is a perfect illustration of why policy intervention in this project area is being contemplated. If we take no action and that low-scale residential stays in place, this is probably what we're going to get. This is what the market is going to do to get the most money out of the land. You're going to have really big houses on small lots because that's how the market can get more money out of the land, even though there's not an increase in entitlement. And so what that means is that the same number of people live here, and they're all paying more to live here, right? So you're losing the diversity of household income that is prevalent here. And so just that's really the motivation for the policy change here, is to keep this from, there will be redevelopment. We can't stop that from happening, but to try to point redevelopment in a direction where more people at more points of income are able to enjoy the benefits of this part of the city, the access to the park, the access to downtown, and to BRT, and in similar long run to the private redevelopment of downtown South. So there's a fair number of other recommendations in the study that were not picked up for area-specific guidance. And I wanted to talk a little bit about those. I think Councilmember Harrison, you had some questions about these. And so, got to pull up my cheat sheet here. This first one about working with local builders, this is already part of Housing and Neighborhoods citywide strategy, and the public benefit option or agreement idea, this idea of public benefit model, some kind of density bonus for some kind of public benefit, is really being achieved through the transit overlay district, which was applied as part of the western and southern BRT corridor efforts. So the City Council has already rezoned most of the project area, the Dix Edge project area, to apply the overlay. So there's already in place a height benefit for projects that bring affordable housing to the project area.
Bynum, if I could just ask about 1.4. So you mentioned that is a citywide strategy targeting and working with local builders, developers, and investors to build new affordable housing. Could you give me like an example? Does that show up like this is how we do that, or is it more of an overall guiding strategy?
Sure. So in the bond that was passed most recently, the housing bond, there's a bucket of money specifically there for acquisition in the BRT corridors, which would include this project area. The idea that we want to put those resources in areas of the city where households that occupy those units will really benefit, right?
The Ottawa project would be a good example.
That's a very specific project.
Yeah, can't even talk today. A very specific project would be the Ottawa project, working with the land trust and Raleigh Rays that we did with the land for $1.
Thank you.
I had a question too.
Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna kind of wait, but since you brought up 3.6, that was something that I was looking at when we were looking at the implementation and policy actions. I like this idea of a public benefit agreement model, especially for affordable housing in this area. But is it just going to contain the density bonus idea?
That's what's in the overlay now. That's what's been applied in I would say probably 75-80% of the project area already.
How do you know how much that's been really utilized across the city?
It's only been in place for about 6 months.
Okay.
So right now, 0, because nothing has had long enough time to be permitted and constructed.
Has there been rezonings that are in these overlay districts for transportation, and have we seen a willingness from developers wanting to use the density bonuses?
Well, the intent of the density bonus is that you don't have to rezone, that you have the entitlement to the height by right if you're including the affordable units. And so we are seeing, I can think of one project that's been submitted on Hillsborough Street that takes advantage of the bonus.
I like density bonuses. That was something I brought up when I was campaigning. I just want to ensure that when we're talking about housing affordability, that we're offering, I guess, a range of different public benefits agreement models that could be utilized. And so the program's only been around for 6 months, so obviously there's some time to kind of flesh it out and see what works, what doesn't work. But
Right.
I just am curious if the developers would really be interested in actually utilizing it for affordable housing.
Staff is too. So we did a lot of work with a consulting firm actually to help us try to find that sweet spot of it's worthwhile. I get to the developer that they would actually want to participate, but also that there would be enough of community return that it would be worthwhile to offer. Right? It's really a pretty narrow window of willing to accept and willing to offer, right?
Especially if you can just build by right and not
Yeah.
include any more density, and
Yeah.
you can just make your
Yeah.
money that way.
Yeah. So that's something that we are absolutely monitoring and considering. I can imagine that we would come back once we have information about how much the density bonus is being utilized, that we would come back and either say the deal isn't sweet enough, the market's not responding, or looks like the deal might be a little too sweet, too many people like this, we should probably up the metrics a little bit so we're getting the city's getting something better out of it.
Would housing vouchers be something that could be applicable in this public benefit agreement model?
I don't think that's really how I think of those as kind of two separate administrative processes. But I can certainly talk with Housing and Neighborhoods. We can come back with some more information for you on that.
Because my kind of understanding of it, and excuse me for monopolizing it, I'm just trying to understand things, is that we have a lot of people with housing vouchers and not a lot of places that are able to accept them. So along with density bonuses, maybe it's if you could include housing vouchers in your...
Oh, if you would accept a voucher, we would offer you additional height. That's certainly something we can look at. Yeah.
So, Councilmember, we do have Erica Brandt here in the audience, and I do know there was an update provided to you maybe 6 weeks ago about some pending and upcoming work around evaluating our affordable housing efforts. I do believe one of those is a study of some of our affordable housing incentives in terms of trying to evaluate the market effectiveness of that. I'm not certain about that, but we can certainly make sure that question of vouchers, if that's not included in the scope, is included. So I can't see Erica, but I do believe that that evaluation is still ongoing and will be, the council will get future recommendations in terms of potential tweaks or adjustments to some of those programs.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to second that. I think it's something we've heard from nonprofit affordable housing developers, that this is something that they're struggling with, some of their clientele, is just to make sure that these vouchers are accepted. And that would be such a huge, I think, transformational shift in our city if we could see more of those being accepted.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, can we go ahead? Okay. So a couple more ideas that got called out around from the plan, and why were these not included in area-specific guidance. So this next one about land acquisition grants to support new development of affordable housing in Dix Edge and other city locations. Again, that's what Housing and Neighborhoods is, part of what they're doing. In addition to providing gap financing for 4% deals, they're also 4% tax credit projects. They're also helping with land acquisition. And then this next policy is kind of a shift away from affordable housing, more towards wetland and riparian corridors. And so this is already addressed by North Carolina floodplain regulations, and also recent updates to the Unified Development Ordinance. I think you all remember you authorized a text change. Was that just Tuesday? It feels like a really long time ago. That was Tuesday, to help bring our city regulations in compliance with state regulations. So that's ongoing. And then there's an idea about evaluating slowing erosion along Rocky Branch Creek. So this is actually the next watershed study that Stormwater is going to be conducting, and was really kind of catalyzed by the Dix Edge study. So Stormwater staff was a really important part of the staff team, city staff team for this project, which is, we've only done that on a couple of projects now. It's been very productive. It's definitely a model we're going to carry forward. And this includes assessment of stream bank stability, prioritization. So this is part of the watershed studies. It's kind of their broader program. So assessing stream bank stability of major stream corridors, prioritization of by severity of stream bank erosion, and evaluation of potential restoration opportunities. This is in the scoping phase, and will begin this summer with an estimated completion in 2024. So I would say very much an early action item coming out of the Dix Edge plan. There was one other idea that got raised in the project, and there were questions about why this didn't come forward in area-specific guidance. This is around the idea of a synthetic TIF that basically says increase in future real estate values and anticipated future property tax would be redirected specifically to this project area. That is, I think there are kind of two things inherent in that. It implies allocating funds before collection, that you all as a body would make a decision to specifically channel money to one particular part of the city. I think you've had a couple of budget work sessions now. I think you're sort of starting to get a feel for some of the tough choices. This also would seem to imply an increase in the tax rate, either citywide or that, I guess you might consider this as like a municipal service district. There's been a lot of study about that in this area because of the park. I don't think there's been anything conclusive that really suggests we should push hard on that at this time. I think that will come back. We'll keep evaluating that as an organization, right?
Bynum, if it's okay, I just want to talk about that one a little
Sure.
bit. The synthetic TIF, there's a lot of areas I think we have concerns around displacement and just, reduction of affordable housing. This is just one area in the city. I am familiar now that there is a map of areas that are at risk for displacement that city staff has developed, and I think this is a map that might be useful for our future decision making if we are thinking about doing any kind of reallocation or focusing, tax dollars towards a specific area for affordable housing. I just thought the map was incredibly helpful as we look at really any changes that we're making in land use, rezoning cases. And so I guess one recommendation I'd have is to make sure that map is available to us. And I'm not sure when in the process that comes, if that needs to be added into to be kind of comp plan guidance or some other opportunity there. So I don't know, Bino, if you have any ideas or when do we pursue that?
Do you want me to try to take this? So I think the map that you're referring to, I think you might have heard, or the public might have heard the term Public Project Community Support Fund. So this is a pilot that we created in the last year's budget. The idea was to direct targeted resources to areas that are experiencing development pressure and are next to a city project. But as a part of that process, there was a citywide mapping using a number of factors to identify what were those neighborhoods that had the potential of experiencing displacement if development pressure were to create. So we can absolutely share that map. It is not currently reflected in the comprehensive plan. I think that is something that certainly could be in the future. You will have a work session on an update on the Public Project Community Support Fund, I believe, this summer. And we can certainly make sure that that map is in there, and that planning staff is available to talk about any reflection that could happen there. So that fund was funded at $1.5 million in the last year's budget. I think at maybe two council meetings ago, you heard about a couple of pilot programs that were intended to address small business support and homeowner stabilization in some of the areas that were impacted. But thank you for the question, and I do think we can make that analysis and talk about future options.
But yeah, I think as we consider whether we want to do like a localized taxing program, we have to also consider the rest of the areas of the city that are in need. And so like right now we have the 1 penny, tax for affordable housing, but Durham has 2 pennies. So I'm curious, is that something that we want to address as a council? Have we talked about that? I know we have some tax rates increases coming up right now, but yeah. any thoughts?
So it's a couple of things. I think we need to also look at what Durham has done as far as housing compared to what we've done. And I think you'll probably see a difference there. As well as remember the very people you're trying to help, they get hit with property taxes in one form or another. So we have to be careful when we talk about, how many more pennies we may want to add, because it's going to impact the people you're trying to help at the same time.
Let's see. I think that's all I had on some of those topics. So I'll let you keep going there. Thanks, Bynum.
Super, thank you. So I mentioned that Rocky Branch project as an early action item. You've seen information about Lake Wheeler Road improvements as early action item out of this project. So this was the city-initiated rezoning is another one of those. That was authorized by council just about a year ago to move forward with this process. And the expectation is that the city-initiated rezoning could yield about 240 affordable units in the project area. The bulk of those would be on the 1500 South Wilmington site. So just a reminder of interaction there. And then depending on the committee's recommendation and the council's action, there are a couple of policies and actions in the pending comprehensive plan amendment that you might want to revisit depending on how the rezoning plays out. So there's some impacts there. So if you're not going to rezone 1500 South Wilmington, you probably don't want to amend the future land use map away from parks and open space. And I have the language for these other policies and actions So there's a policy in here about expanding housing opportunities at all income levels. If you don't move forward with the rezoning, you may want to revisit the language in this policy. This one, I think, could probably stand as is. The council may wish to make a tweak depending on what path you take. Long-term affordability, again, this could probably stand as is if you choose to not move forward with development of 1500 South Wilmington Street. You might, if you chose a different path, for example, if one of the options we'll talk about when we talk about the rezoning is the possibility of disposition and redirecting profit from sale to development of affordable housing. So then the maintaining ownership language here wouldn't really be appropriate anymore, right? That wouldn't really line up with what the council intended to do. And then there are a couple of actions here. Clearly, we would remove 1500 Wilmington Street from the action if you all were not going to do that. And then I think another outstanding question, one of the actions here recommended is an upzoning of those areas that would go from low scale to moderate scale residential. And on the future land use map that we would recommend a city-initiated rezoning to go with that. That ties back to that Summit Avenue example that I showed you. I think a question for the council would be, do you still want to pursue that if you're not going to realize significant affordable units in the project area on the 1500 site or someplace else nearby? So that is, I think that's my end. That's my end on the comprehensive plan presentation. Happy to answer more questions. I know we've hit a lot already. What questions can I answer?
One that I have, I just want to make sure I understood your slide that mentions the public benefit agreement as kind of existing being able to exist outside of the comprehensive plan amendments. There is something in the plan around creating a Dix Edge overlay. Is that similar, different? Are these the same? Or?
It is similar, and the transit overlay district really brought that to fruition.
Okay, so the sense is that any kind of Dix Edge overlay is not necessary because of the transit overlay. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to make sure I was understanding that. Okay, and then can you go to that last slide you were just on? Yes. Was there any consideration, or in this, would there be any consideration for picking one of the other, like, newly available missing middle options that could create future affordability? I'm gonna forget the name, but there's that one type of missing middle, units over 20 units created have to be affordable. Am I saying nonsense?
Are you thinking about the frequent transit development option?
Or the high density.
I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about that one. You're just
Right, so that's it's a very comparable density bonus. The requirements for the affordable units are the same, the percent is the same, and the height bonus is the same. And that's available to parcels proximate to the frequent transit corridors. Given that most of the project area is already in the transit overlay, which has the same bonus, I don't know that it doesn't. They've already got the access to the thing.
Okay.
Right. There's not some other bonus that we could open up to this area, to this project area.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Because in my mind, I was thinking if all those R6 properties, instead of rezoning them to R10, if they were rezoned to that other type you mentioned, would we be creating capacity for
all the R6 already has the transit-oriented development. I'm sorry, the transit. I'm getting tripped up because transit-oriented development and transit overlay district have the same acronym.
Yes.
TOD. It's not confusing at all. They already have, so all the R6 area and the project area now already has the transit
Got it.
overlay district.
Okay.
Which is what is opening them up to that height bonus.
Got it. Understood. Okay, thank you.
That is only the mixed use district. That's only the mixed use district. That's what Pat is hovering behind me about. Yeah. And the FTDO doesn't afford that bonus to residential districts either, right? Yeah, so neither of those would actually apply to the residential districts. It only applies to the mixed use districts.
I'm like, so I guess I have a lot of thoughts. But one of the questions I was thinking about when I was reading through this study, it was really detailed, was does the city really have any guidelines for like mixed income development that combines like market rate and like affordable low income housing, or is it just kind of like by will?
So the housing location map in the comprehensive plan identifies areas where we would want to direct affordable housing, and that's based on directing new affordable units to areas where you have relatively diverse population and also higher average income. The exceptions we make on that map are around remarkable transit access and remarkable jobs access. So really trying to make sure that we're pointing our dollars for affordable housing funding to areas of opportunity, so that low-income households are mixed up with every other kind of household in the city, and that we're not creating concentrations of low-income households. All really working hard not to concentrate those, particularly in a part of the city, isolate them from the broader benefits of community life.
Okay. And so
Council member, I want to make sure we answered your question. So I think Bynum interpreted your question about the city's housing policy. I think I understood your question to be, is there policy language that would encourage private developers to include a broader income mix in their private development? Was that your question?
Yes, and
Is there policy language that would encourage developers to do a thing? I would say there's some broad housing policy that is considered in the course of rezoning, which is really when developers ever consider policy in the comprehensive plan, is when they're asking you all for something more. So we look at housing choice, housing variety, those types of things. I will say at this point in North Carolina, I can't think of a project that puts affordable units in the same building with market rate units. The financing in our market is not delivering that level of sophistication in housing product yet. There are a couple projects planned in Durham, but they're not built yet.
I was just wondering because during your presentation, one of the things you said was point redevelopment towards inclusionary and mixed income, or like that was like kind of the gist of what you said. And I just like wanted to know more about how we can encourage that, because I would like to see that.
Yeah.
And I can't remember which slide you mentioned it on. I think it was like related to one of the slides.
Yeah, I think it was back in the, I can go back if you would like.
And one thing too, historically, Raleigh with tax credits focus around the 60%, 50% range. There's been an ask for a deeper dive to go lower, around 30%. The thing is, when we go lower, then you get around 80. So you kind of get a different range of those between 80% and below within projects. But anything above 80%, I haven't seen since I've been on council where you have affordable housing along with market rate. It's either you have, I got a great example. I have a project right now off of Rock Quarry Road, off of Sunnybrook, one side is market rate, the other side is a tax credit. So they're beside each other, but they're not the same project. Now, we did do something different with our Old Town rezoning. And with Old Town, we put a stipulation where they have to have a certain percentage dedicated to either seniors or low income. And that's how we got the senior living part within the project. So
That's already been built.
it's being built right now.
How many units?
Well, it's 500, so it's 600 acres. We have 366 apartments. They're doing 700 townhomes, and they're going to do about 500 single-family homes. And that's outside of the commercial node. That's part of that. That also, I think they can do 120 apartments within that commercial node of that same project.
Do these conditions ever really yield like units? Because I'm not going to say who, but somebody in the community, the development community, has told me that the conditions are they're easy to get out of, and that out of all the conditions that we've had that are encouraging, like including affordable housing or like things for seniors or just like things that are more affordable within the development, they're like, it's yielded zero.
So in the Old Town project, there's a sign that says up senior living 55 plus. The signs are up now. Regency is building those homes. So that part is happening. The tax credit projects, no, because that's part of their funding. So once they do a tax credit project that says they're going to do so many units, they have to do those units. It's when we do things that are outside of the tax credit and project, and a lot of times we'll have cases where someone will say, well, when I do X number of units, anything above that, I will start putting affordable housing.
And then they don't
And
build it.
historically, and this goes back 20, 30 plus years, if that X number is 200, they do 199.
Okay. I'm just wondering how we can like get better about
I
that.
just want to check in on timing. Bynum, you have one more presentation, correct? And we also do have public here for comments, so I just want to make sure we do get to that. Yes, but please, Councilmember Patton, and then maybe to our next presentation, and then public comments.
Yeah, sorry, mine's a tangent. So I'll put it out and we can table it if needed. But in the conversation around lenders not having the sophistication or disposition toward helping to create mixed income communities, has there ever been any exploration by the city of authority or incentivizing we can do with lenders themselves to cultivate the type of environment we're looking for?
Yeah, I think my language was actually kind of hard on the lending community. A lot of the limits, as I understand it, are around the low-income housing tax credit project and the requirements to qualify for those funds. And they are looking for a simplicity of ownership that a mixed building does not deliver.
Yeah, because the lenders want to make sure they get their money back. Madam Chair, I know there's another one, but do you want to do public comment on this one topic for Dix? And do you want to do both? Okay.
So you want to take the presentation for the rezoning case now? Great. Okay, so Erica Brandt from Housing and Neighborhoods is going to speak about kind of the motivation for the project. Wayne Miles from Stormwater has some technical information to help you better understand the site. And then I'll be back to close it out with the nuts and bolts of zoning process.
Thanks, Bynum. Erica Brandt, Housing and Neighborhoods. Just a really quick add-on to that conversation we were just having. I think one opportunity that y'all might be interested in, maybe talking with Housing and Neighborhoods at some point further with, is the small-scale pilot that we've initiated. There could be opportunity for a little bit greater income mixing through that pilot. So I'm going to talk today about this rezoning case, present some different options for the sites, including development possibilities, particularly going to focus on the 1500 South Wilmington Street site. And then I'll hand it off to Wayne Miles from Stormwater, who will talk about some of the environmental constraints and stormwater impacts of the different options. So tying it back to what Bynum was just talking about with the study, this rezoning really stems, as she talked about, from a directive from the prior council for staff to assess city-owned parcels and identify opportunities for affordable housing development. And this is one of those identified parcels, and it really addresses and aligns with these community priorities that emerged from the Dix Edge study, particularly the housing affordability component. Just to kind of orient myself and everyone, I took a look at Zillow this morning, and the median asking rent right now in this neighborhood in Raleigh, if we're talking just about the east side of Saunders Street, is $3,800 a month, which is more than 75% higher than the 27603 area code as a whole, and twice as high as the median asking rent citywide, according to Zillow anyway. So I feel like that just really underscores the intense pressure that this neighborhood is facing around affordability. So we've listed out some considerations here for these sites, and I'll kind of talk through them a little bit. We've talked about how developing here would further community priorities of the Dix Edge study. The buildable area of the sites can really provide a pretty significant number of units, particularly that Wilmington Street site, and we'll show some images a little later that would show what that would look like in terms of the actual configuration on the site. As y'all know, the site is very opportunity rich. It's very close to the Greenway system. Rocky Branch Trail is right there along the site. Walnut Creek Trail is right to the south. Eliza Pool Park is in this neighborhood. It's a great park space. There's a smaller park kind of tucked away in Raleigh. And then Mount Hope Cemetery to the north is over 30 acres. And it's actually got a really great view of downtown. So the really high development demand that we're seeing in this area and the limited land, this really presents an opportunity to ensure that some of the new development here is affordable. We know that there's going to be a lot of development in this area. We're already seeing downtown south, Park City, I think it's called, across Saunders Street. There's going to be a lot of building going on here, and the city ownership of this parcel and kind of city directive of what happens here is one way that we can really make sure that some of the new units that get built here are affordable. So we're going to talk through what the buildable area on the Wilmington Street site looks like. It's about 6.5 acres out of the total 24 acres on the site, and we'll show some images in a minute. And then we'll talk through 2 development scenarios that were generated by planning for both a townhome possibility, which could be done under the current zoning, and then a multifamily scenario that could be done with the rezoning. So to kind of back up for a minute and talk at a higher level of what the options for these sites are, we've got 3 basic possibilities here. The first one being pursuing a city-sponsored development of new affordable units under which the city would maintain ownership of the land and probably put out some sort of solicitation for a development partner. The second option would be no action, maintaining the site's current condition. And then the third option would be selling the land for private development and then using those proceeds to fund affordable housing elsewhere. And we'll talk through, after the development scenarios, we'll talk through kind of the pros and cons from staff perspective about each of these. So this image shows the total area that could be built on. I mentioned it's about 6.5 acres out of the total 24 acres on the site. It's this kind of green area on the map. You'll see that there's a kind of steep drop from the edge of that area, and Wayne will actually he'll present a different perspective showing a cross-section. It's pretty much a hard cutoff there. There's a lot of topography that would really prevent building any further off of that green area, into the flood area, the floodway area. And then there is this little area over on the kind of right of the image that is a drainage area that can't really be built on either. So it's really just the strip of land that fronts Fayetteville Street that could hold up some building. So under the townhome concept, which is possible under the current zoning, 62 townhomes could be built with about 1,700 square feet of livable space each. And this mock-up just shows some kind of tree conservation, green space, amenities, and paths incorporated into the site design. And then under the multifamily concept, it's the same basic footprint, but just a little denser and higher. So this could fit about 250 units, a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units with square footage ranging from 890 to about 1,400 square feet. So this would be most likely the scenario under option 1 of a city development project for new affordable housing on this site, just to maximize the units that we could get out of this development. And I'll kind of talk through some of the benefits here. Of course, you know, the housing itself is a benefit, but by having the city maintain ownership of the land, that's also ensuring long-term affordability. And I think we've kind of talked about this in prior presentations that Housing and Neighborhoods has done with council, but you know, in a typical tax credit development, you see 30-year affordability restrictions on typical units, and then after that, you know, it's kind of anything goes in terms of what could happen to that building or how that site could be redeveloped. But if the city is maintaining ownership of the land, it's a way to just ensure that any future use of the buildings or the space will be for affordable housing. And then the second kind of bullet under here is talking about subdivision. So going back quick to the buildable area, so you know, only about 6.5 acres can actually be built on here, and subdivision would be an option to kind of clarify that, basically just carving out this buildable piece, you know, plus probably a little extra for the tree conservation margin from the rest of the parcel to really delineate, hey, we're not going to build, we're not going to tear down the greenway and put a house, we're not going to do any of that, and just build on this green kind of highlighted buildable area. So I talked about, you know, the pros there with option 1. The con is, of course, the loss of this green space, which would, you know, kind of on the converse, option 2 would maintain that green space, and that would be the real benefit of that option. The con with that being just the opportunity cost, you know, maintaining affordability, promoting affordability, creating affordability in the project area around Dix Edge is, you know, a community priority, and it would be very hard to do without kind of city ownership of sites. You know, this is a very unique opportunity that the city actually does own land here that could be used for this, and just knowing about all the demand from the private market and the development pressure to build other stuff on land in this area, it's pretty unlikely that the city would be able to do anything on non-city owned land at this point in this area. And then the final option is selling the land for private development and using the sales proceeds to fund affordable housing elsewhere. So this could be done with or without rezoning. You know, with the rezoning, probably the price that could be gotten for the sale would be greater. With or without subdivision, I'm not well versed enough in planning to know what the benefits would be there. So the pros, you know, of course, having more funds for affordable housing is always great, but again, creating affordability in this neighborhood would be a lost opportunity. And, you know, frankly, just with time value of money, dollars that go into a bucket for affordable housing development get less valuable as time goes on. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Wayne to talk about the stormwater piece of things.
Thank you, Erica. Wayne Miles, I'm the Stormwater Program Manager. Good afternoon. There have been a number of questions that came up during the public hearing related to stormwater and floodplain-related issues, especially on the 1500 property, that the floodplain is a major part of that property, and I know there were some concerns about the flood-prone area. Quickly, just to get some definitions down, I wanted to talk about the definition of a floodplain is the elevation of property that would flood during what's called a 100-year storm. And another way of thinking of that would be a storm that would occur on average about one year in 100, or a 1% chance probability. So for perspective here, that's around 8 inches of storm in about 24 hours. For those of you who were here for Fran in 1996, that was about the closest to a 100-year storm that we've had throughout this area. And within the floodplain, there are definitions for what's called the floodway. That is the blue area on this map. If you've ever seen a creek that's flooding, that's the area that there's actually flow moving through the area. fairly swift current. And then there's what's called the floodway fringe, which is the area that has water pooled up on the edges, but it's pretty stagnant or not really flowing. And those two areas together constitute what's called the floodplain. So that's the entire flooded area. There are buildings and structures in Raleigh that are located in the floodplain. A couple scenarios. Before the late 70s, we didn't have floodplain maps or floodplain regulations. So prior to that, there were no restrictions on where to build. So there are some older structures in that situation that are located in the floodplain. And then prior to just July of 2022, just last year, our development regulations did still allow some development in the floodplain, only in the fringe area, as long as they did not develop more than 50% of that fringe area, either with fill or buildings. And then the other restriction was those buildings would have to be elevated to the finished floor being at least 2 feet higher than the 100-year flood elevation. So just last year that was changed. Now our regulations say in the floodway, vacant property can no longer be developed with either fill or new structures. So that was the restriction, the most restrictive changes that we've made here just recently. Applying this to the 1500 South Wilmington site, the colors remain the same here. So you can see the blue area is the floodway. That's where you'd have current during a flooding event. And then the pink area is the floodplain. So you can see there's a lot of floodway and floodplain on this property on the eastern side. You can also see, though, that if you look to the east of this property, the pink, which is the floodplain, extends much further out to the east than it does to the west. And I'll show a little bit more about why. And it is that steep terrain that Erica alluded to in her graphics. This graphic, there's a lot going on. The colors represent the elevation. So the blue area in the middle is the lowest. And then as the elevation rises, it becomes green and yellow. But what I'd really like to show are some profiles. And if you look at these red lines here, this is a profile that if you look at the cross section, you can see the elevation change. And I'm going to zoom in on one of those now and show you a little bit more closely what that looks like. But we've cut 3 profiles through this land property, and let me show you what those look like now. So this is elevation on the left or on the y-axis. And the low point at the bottom is the creek. And the little person standing there is approximately where the Greenway Trail is that goes along the eastern side of the creek. And that is right near the edge of the property line. So that's the portion of the property that's in the floodplain that's down in the lower elevations. If you see moving to the left, the very steep hill, and then the buildable area is on that little shelf just below Fayetteville Street. And so in this profile, as you recall, was at the farthest northern end of the property. And in this situation, the buildable area is about 11 feet higher than the 100-year flood elevation, which is shown there by the blue line, which is about 236.5 feet. And then looking at a couple other profiles, this one's a little further south, so more in the middle of the property. The elevation of the building area is even higher in this situation. It's about 21 feet higher than the 100-year flood elevation. And then lastly, the furthest south profile is even a little bit higher, further up the hill, about 23 feet. So in all 3 of these situations, for this piece of property, we would categorize the flooding risk of the buildable area is very low in this situation. I know it appears that it's adjacent to the floodplain, but when you really look at the elevation difference, it's a very low structural flooding risk. Now, moving on to the other property, and if there's any questions about that, I'd be glad to take them, or I can talk about the 151 Waterworks Street property, okay? So we did a similar analysis for this property, and the colors here are also the same on the floodplain. So you can see the floodway, the blue part, does not touch this property, okay? It's just the floodplain, and the floodplain is really in the middle. So you might see the red outline as the property. The ends of this property are the only developable area of this parcel. And we have put a profile through this part. We're going right down the long the middle of this property again. And then so here's what that looks like. Again, the 100-year flood elevation is shown. The person is there just for reference. And then the two buildable areas, which each are relatively small areas. On the right side is about 3 feet, the buildable area above the 100-year flood, and then about 8 feet above the 100-year flood on the other side, on the western side. And so we've categorized this as a low flooding risk. It would have to be developed at least 2 feet above the 100-year flood elevation, but based on these parcels, you could do that fairly easily. But again, the buildable area is relatively small. I wanted to close on my last slide and just talk a little bit more about stormwater mitigation measures as well, because this came up. Under the city's regulations, which this property would have to follow with any development, we require the control of the post-development stormwater peak flows to be at or equal or less than the pre-development conditions for a 2-year storm and a 10-year storm, or also called a 50% probability storm or a 10% probability storm. So that's what's required. Should the council interested in being considered of more stringent peak flow requirements, we could consider also controlling peak flows for larger storms, a 25-year storm and 100-year storms. And then in addition, could use green stormwater infrastructure, could be designed to also control post-development stormwater flow volumes to pre-developed conditions, and this would provide added water quality protection from the stormwater impacts of the site as well. And GSI and even low-impact development, which more addresses issues during the development and construction process, could both be used on this site if the council decided to move forward with this project and did want to make a commitment to implement these types of controls and mitigation measures as part of the development and construction of this site. And I'd be glad to answer any questions at this time on.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions before we go to public comment?
I have a couple. Thanks. How is my understanding that 100-year storms are happening more frequently now as a result of climate change? Maybe not here. I understood your reference to Fran, but do you know roughly, like nationwide, how frequently 100-year storms are happening?
Yeah, so there is an increase in uptick in frequency of storms. So, one thing that's important to understand is you may hear about 100-year storms happening a lot, but that is only at one point in time oftentimes. So, within the last few years, we've had 100-year storms during a very heavy summer thunderstorm, right? But that was only at one small place in the city that happened to have a very intense cloudburst and downfall. That doesn't mean we had widespread impacts for a 100-year storm. Okay, so that's one reason people hear about 100-year storms happening more frequently than it seems like they should. The last storm that we had that really had widespread 100-year impacts, as I mentioned, was Fran. which hard to believe for those of us who were here. It was set 27 years ago already. But we are seeing an increase in North Carolina, in the Southeast in general, in the frequency of larger storms. Hurricanes seem to be larger when they come this direction. They seem to move more slowly, which causes increased rainfall impacts from those areas. And there's a lot of research. We have done some preliminary statistics. In the last 20 years, we've seen a small uptick, but we don't have enough data to actually change the definition of a 100-year storm. But that's something that is being looked at nationally, and look at the changes of those definitions as would be appropriate based on more recent statistics and rainfall information. The hard thing about a 100-year storm is we barely have 100 years of rainfall data. And so from a statistical analysis, you really need a much longer period of time. Even just the last 20 years, you're really extrapolating, right, in terms of what a 100-year storm would be. But it's something that we're definitely looking at, and we're seeing evidence that climate change is impacting our storm events here.
And then a different question that I had, the waterworks site, is there a similar mock-up or planning drawing similar to the one that y'all presented for the Wilmington Street site? There's not. Okay.
Not that I'm aware of, although I think, Pat gave some estimates maybe at a similar site two, which was about 2/3 of an acre, was maybe a 10 or 12 unit site. So it's probably comparable to that, is all that's the two ends of that site would support. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Did you, for the viewing audience, kind of define what a 100-year storm really is?
Yes. So a 100-year storm is a storm that has a 1% probability of happening in any year, in any given year. And that's based on analysis of long-term rainfall statistics. It's a statistical analysis to get those probabilities and percentages. Here in Raleigh, that's roughly about an 8-inch storm within one day, within 24 hours. So pretty large rainfall event. Now, the confusing thing is it can also be a really intense summer thunderstorm that only lasts for an hour. Okay, so it might be 4 inches that happens in 1 hour that would have very isolated impacts, but we as engineers still call that a 1% probability storm or a 100-year storm based on the statistics. These floodplain maps, though, are based on the broader impact, 24-hour, 8 inches, and we run that rainfall through our computer simulations. We see how high the rainfall, the flood rises, and then we make maps based on those elevations. And that's what we're using for our floodplain regulations. Now, one more subtle distinction I want to make, too. In Raleigh, we project built-out conditions in the future based on all land use zoning currently, assuming everything is built as zoned, and that's the assumption for our 100-year maps or our floodplain maps. So we do take into account some level of future development in our regulatory floodplain regulations.
I really appreciate that. I am kind of somewhat of a subject matter expert when it comes to this. So I just wanted to get to the phrase, because I think, the 100-year storm phrase can be a little bit misleading. It can be a little bit confusing. It can be. How I understand it is that it has to do with return of a period of flood event that can happen. And based off of what I'm seeing, these storms are happening more frequently. They're one every 30 years is what they're saying. In some places, in parts of the country, are getting 100-year storms every year. So that was my first statement / question. I am not completely convinced about this rezoning request, mostly because I also, as a subject matter expert, understand that the FEMA flood maps as they are not always getting to the root of how much people really are at risk and the flood events are happening across the country. And more studies are showing that the maps need to be like looked at and evaluated in a different way. So specifically for this case, and this is more of a statement and less of a question, I'm not sure that in this area, with the building being where it is, that the flood maps as they are really going to address the harm that could potentially happen here. And I understand that we have to follow like what is the federal standards for FEMA, and the FEMA standards are what they are. I'm just, as a person who knows, I'm aware that the maps aren't like where they need to be for a lot of different things. NC State research has shown that as well. Researchers here in North Carolina are looking at the reality of the maps just not being adequate enough to really address the amount of harm that is happening with flooding across the country. So I don't know if I'm convinced for this particular parcel of land that the maps as they are going to get to the actual need. Another thing that you brought up was that the developer, we're looking at like the future of development in relation to the maps that are being drawn. And I know that we took it like as a snapshot from about 5 to 6 years ago. Is there something that's like updated over time? Because at least that's what was said when this came to council in January. I asked about like what sort of maps were being used, how the future of development was playing into it. And I'm just like curious about how that is updating and just remaining accurate and relevant since we have such rapid development happening in this area as well across the city.
So yes, I think it's fair to say that the computer models that were used to create these maps were 2017, 16? Were updated last in 2016. But as I said, it did look at built out of all of the undeveloped land as well in those simulations.
Yeah, I think maybe to get like a more accurate picture of like development, especially for this, I would love to see like something that could be like more like in the last 5 years, maybe like sooner than, because what year is it? 2023. So yeah, I had to remember. You said with not.
No, I'm saying, I said that's just about this right at that line. Because if they did it, when did you do it? In the last couple of months, or did you do it in the fall?
So yeah, so these maps were, so let me go back a little bit. So right now FEMA and the state are the ones that do the modeling and create these maps. You may have heard me mention that is something that we would like to bring in-house to city staff so that these maps can be updated more quickly, because the previous updates were 2006, and
Right.
they're supposed to be updated about every 5 years is the goal, but the state with limited resources and funding and so forth delayed those updates. So that is something we're looking to bring in-house through a cooperative technical partnership with FEMA so that we do have the capability. And then when we do update those maps, that FEMA will accept those. But that's an application process. We have to, go through and get accepted. It might be a year or two at least to do that.
That sounds awesome, Walter. I guess my follow-up question for what you just said there is like, how can I be more supportive of that? Like, help you move that along? Because I think, we have to be the pioneers of our own city. And sometimes, like, I really just don't think the FEMA maps are adequate enough. And it especially with the development being, 8 years behind what is actually being developed and how things are actually happening and taking shape across the city. I would love to see it come like more into the city and be combined in the process, because I think you guys do a really great job. So
Thank you
I
very
just want
much.
to put that out there.
So,
Y'all have
council
been
member,
very
you will
supportive.
have an
Thank you.
upcoming budget work session about Raleigh Water, where they will forecast some of the upcoming staffing needs and initiatives that would help you to know what kind of resources it would take for stormwater to take on those activities. Do want to make sure your question was answered relative to this site, and I do know that we know that this site has never flooded in to our knowledge, in terms of the developable area. I don't know if we have a record of what water levels have reached on this particular site.
No, this is not near some place that we have historical records. I guess my reaction, my feedback would be, I agree with you. Floodplain mapping is not accurate, okay? And climate change is having an impact. There's no question about that. And I guess what I would say is, though, inaccuracies may account for a foot or two, and that's actually why we require base flood elevations, finished floors to be built 2 feet above the 100-year, is to give a buffer for any inaccuracies. I'm confident in saying they're not 11 feet off.
Yeah, just jump in here. So my personal concern is not around flooding of these properties if they were to be developed because of the height. My concern is that we have a forested tract that they're currently in a highly erodible area that protects the floodplain and it protects the creek and are the ecosystem benefits that are available in an area that's otherwise, relatively, hot if you don't have all the trees and a lot of impervious surface around there already. So I think because of the height, I don't think the properties themselves will be at risk. That's just my point of view, but we are creating a potential, during construction and further down the line erosion concerns. And that just kind of goes back to some of the points that were made in the opening presentation by Bynum around some of the goals in the Dix Edge study that I have trouble squaring. So like CO 7.7, the idea is to mitigate and prevent further erosion along Rocky Branch Creek, specifically the portion that runs parallel to Fayetteville Street. So supposedly we're doing that, but then we're also developing this site at the same time, and then we're also doing a study. So I had someone talk to me about it, and they called it kind of like broccoli cookies. Broccoli is good for you, and we all like cookies. We need affordable housing. We also need green space, and I'm just afraid, is this the site to put them together? I don't know if we can have both at the same time. But I do want to move on to public comments because the public is here, give you all some time if you want to add anything to the conversation, whether it's about the Dix Edge study or this particular rezoning case, and then let's bring back to council for action if that's okay. So if you are hoping to speak, could you just raise your hand so I know how many people? Okay. I think I'm going to do about a couple minutes each just so we can get through things. I think I'm just going to start kind of from right to the back. So yeah, I think you raised your hand there if you want to come up for just...
I think we can come back later. She just has a recap of what the rezoning case itself is. Certainly, if you want to take public comment now, you can do that and then come back to that action that was being requested.
Finish with Bynum then. Sorry about that. I forgot. I'm going back. Yeah, you will be right back with you.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. So I just wanted to remind you kind of where we are in the process. We're now calling this Z53B because you approved part of the request already, the Summit Avenue lot. We called that Z53A for record-keeping purposes. So you approved that piece on the 24th. A reminder that Planning Commission did recommend approval for the Wilmington Street parcel. Sorry, can't see. And the Waterworks site. So the zoning here for the Wilmington, Fayetteville has frontage on both. The rezoning here would go to RX5 with an urban limited frontage, and for the Waterworks site would go to RX4 with an urban limited frontage, and you already approved the Summit Avenue site. We use this, a piece of software to help us estimate future capacity. It's throwing out numbers even bigger than our tests did. Just kind of a estimate there. This is consistent with the plan overall. It's inconsistent with the future land use map currently. If you adopted the proposed comprehensive plan amendment, it wouldn't be inconsistent with the future land use map. So there's a place where those two things intersect. There are a lot of consistent policies here, housing variety, a lot of stuff around transit, greenhouse gas reduction, because we expect smaller, more efficient units here and more walkable units. That mixed income neighborhoods, zoning for housing, housing diversity, more around transit. The frontage is consistent, more around transit, more around walking. All those policies are consistent. So the future land use map, if you're inconsistent with the future land use map, you always get tripped up on this policy. And then the reinforcing the urban pattern. This would be a shift in scale in development around what's currently on the ground. I gotta say, what's entitled south of here, like literally a stone's throw, is even taller and mightier than the rezoning you're looking at here. So if you approve the rezoning, this is gonna call it's a de facto amendment to future land use map, would change the entirety of the parcel. If you have adopted the comprehensive plan amendment, that would, I believe, would be adequate. And just a reminder about the Planning Commission's findings. So they were recommending approval for Wilmington and Summit, but not the Waterworks site. They were very concerned about the environmental constraints there. And I have to say the return on that site, given the size, I think the big important policy question in the area study and in the rezoning is around the largest site with the biggest potential. So now public comment.
Oh, wait, I had one question.
Oh, yes,
Can you
ma'am.
remind me again of why there was a 5-3 for the Wilmington Street planning?
For the Wilmington Street thing. I believe the concerns there were around the floodplain. You and your remarks during the meeting on the 24th, and also the Planning Commission talked about this, and the city has the development of the city has a history of pushing people of color to low-lying areas, and I know that. I know it's true. It's not an admirable part of our history, and I think concerns mostly around the optics, if not the function, was really a lot of the concern there.
Thank you, Bynum.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Public comment, if you want to come back up, and thank you very much.
So I don't like to public speak at all, so the fact that I'm talking to you means I care about this. First, I want to clear up the 2 houses that are too big for the lot. That's very unusual in our neighborhood. We're actually just fixing up these bungalows that were built in 1940 for the Raleigh mill workers. So 3 houses burnt down and 3 bigger houses went up. And the site that she showed you was where the community building came down. And yes, the 2 big houses went up. But I want to clarify that the 256 houses that are pretty affordable, like I rent my house for $1,400, is something that we would like to keep in our neighborhood. I feel as though we're putting poor people in a bad situation again, and this has been going on for decades, and it doesn't feel right to me to put poor people in the flood zone. And I think we're also putting poor people on top of poor people. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I think back to Ann.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Franklin, 200 South Dawson Street, Apartment 410. I'm here representing Partners for Environmental Justice as their interim chair. We have some concerns that we expressed in a letter to council. This site is heavily wooded today, and it sits close to areas that have been approved for high-density development. The Downtown South project is very nearby. So the challenge is to figure out where the balance comes for the development that we have endorsed. And I think the profiles that staff has shown you are telling. There's a reason why that property has not developed. The buildable part is about 10 to 12 feet below street level. So if you think about that, who wants to either put their car or themselves below street level? I think the redevelopment of this site will degrade the environment, obviously, of the site itself. We think that it will contribute to downstream flooding, even though we use we get a completely sophisticated control of stormwater, that's expensive. But if we get complete control over it, doesn't guarantee for the next 20 to 50 years that that's going to hold. And downstream, the communities are very vulnerable to being impacted by further water. I think there are some properties actually on Wilmington Street that would be impacted. At a minimum, we hope that you will go beyond the current regulations for green stormwater infrastructure and low-impact development that's meant for sites that have not been developed in the past, and that you may need to draw attention to your fellow council members about that. I'm interested in the city's representation of lost opportunity because, in my opinion, the opportunities were lost substantially with other rezonings that were in the area that could have included affordability. I do not see a sign that affordable housing is encouraged or strongly mapped out so that everyone understands that we're going to see affordable housing wherever we have increased density. So I appreciate your work on this, appreciate the chance to talk with you. I know that this is not simple. There are environmental issues and there are social justice issues here. So we'll stay tuned. And at the moment, we encourage you to not approve this rezoning as it exists for the Wilmington Street part of the rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think next in the front here, was it Chris? Yeah.
I have a handout for the council members. I apologize if you've seen any of those materials before, but I just wanted to make sure that we brought a few things back to the forefront. And Councilmember Black, thank you for your remarks in fact-checking some of the claims we've heard this afternoon in regards to stormwater impacts. That's one of the things that I think a lot of us were very happy during the last election cycle, that we do have some subject matter experts in the room in making these sort of decisions. In the handout that I've included, we have a letter from Dr. Barbara Dahl of NC State University. She is regarded by many as a preeminent expert on Rocky Branch Stream specifically. We also have a letter from Partners for Environmental Justice. You just heard from Anne Franklin. And on the back, there's a few images to just sort of highlight some of the things that, and further fact check some of the claims that have been made by city staff. One of the things that was very interesting to me watching the city staff presentation was this illustration of the slope of the land. In our January 24th remarks and presentation that we made at the city council at that time, one of the points that we tried to make was that the steep slope of this property, even on what is characterized by city staff as the high side of the property, that slope could be enough to make the site unfeasible for the development of affordable housing by itself. As many of you guys are probably aware, steep slope is the single most determinant factor in increasing the cost of an affordable housing project. It makes everything more complicated. So how do you sort of account for that? What city staff showed when they showed these two options of townhomes and multi-unit complexes along Fayetteville Street, they show them right up against the street. That is not possible. As Ann pointed out earlier, there is, you have a 12-foot drop, 10 feet inside the property line. So, we've gone back and forth with city staff on this, like, well, the slope is what's, the problem. Well, today the slope is actually a good thing because the slope is what's going to prevent the flooding. So, I mean, we go back and forth on this. It's either a problem of flooding or it's a problem of the slope, and it's really a problem of both. This site has not been developed in the history of the city of Raleigh, and we've spoken with local historians to confirm that fact. This site has, however, been the site of a few environmental disasters. We had the Raleigh Mill, which was, as one of the other neighbors pointed out, this was the former mill town. I am not aware of any homes that have been destroyed for the purpose of rebuilding more expensive properties on those sites. We do have attrition in our neighborhood. There have been some houses that, have been lost. The property that where my wife and I live, the original structure that was there burned down a few years ago. So there has been some natural attrition. What city staff would like for you to believe is that houses are being purchased at market rate and then are being redeveloped to put, $1 million houses there or whatever. How would rezoning and upzoning our neighborhood to moderate density help with this problem? If you're incentivizing developers to come in and build apartment homes there, that makes it far more economically viable for people to get displaced, for people to move out of these, small bungalow type homes, in favor of a larger apartment development, which will likely be luxury apartment homes. It's honestly, it's kind of hard to rebut some of these things because there were so many different things that I think many of us would immediately point out as being problematic. But I'll just finish my remarks by saying that, one of the big concerns that we have, when you do a development of this size of, we've heard various points up to 599 units is what rezoning would allow for ultimately. When you go into this property and you try to re-engineer this land to be more appropriate for doing a development of this type, you're either talking about moving earthwork or, pushing dirt into that lot to make it more level, which is gonna, what's gonna happen the first time that it rains. You can't just build immediately on dirt that hasn't settled. That's one of the explicit things that Dr. Dahl advises against in her letter. And if you don't, then you've got, this thing hanging off the side of this cliff in what has been for 200 plus years of the city's history, a drainage ditch. There's one, I won't name names, but there's someone who's on the planning commission who strongly objected to this, who described this as an environmental justice disaster. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if I were in your position, I would not feel comfortable approving something that is over the course of this process, we went from 44 acres total of that property. Then they said, well, we never intended to develop all of it. It was only 20 acres. And now we're down to like 6 developable acres out of, the entire site of 1500 South Wilmington Street that are possibly developable. And we're still seeing we're seeing images and language from city staff that we feel are not reflective of the reality. And so much hinges upon this Z5322 rezoning. Basically, if this rezoning is not feasible, a lot of the knock-on things that, the rezoning of the neighborhood to higher density, this urban corridor designation for Fayetteville Street, so much hinges on this site that city planners have called, the low-hanging fruit. I've heard it today referred to as this is an early action item. If you look closely at the facts here, we're talking about building affordable homes in mostly floodplain and definitely floodplain adjacent property. The 2030 comprehensive plan, which I believe was more thought out, had more resources put into it than the Dix Edge area study. I believe that the 2030 comprehensive plan got it right, that this needs to be open, parks and open space in perpetuity. And that's, as a neighborhood spokesperson, that everyone that I've spoken with in the neighborhood, and my wife and I have gone around canvassing door to door, talking to people about the actual plans that the city are trying to put into place here. And I haven't met a single person in our neighborhood that is in favor of this. And we respectfully ask that you vote no on Z5322 and amend, if there is a way to salvage the Dix Edge area study, amend these parts that claim that this quiet neighborhood street is somehow an urban corridor. This is a pie in the sky idea that we'll be fighting against for years if this language is allowed to go forward, because it paints a picture that more can be built there than what is possible. And I'll go ahead and cut it off there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Chris. Let's see. I think we had a couple more in the back, and then to Bob.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Roselli. I live at 1535 Carolee Mills Court, Unit 132. I'm speaking generally in support of the Dix Edge area study and the proposed rezoning to align policy with the study. Specific to my area of concern is really the area west of South Saunders, as opposed to what we were just talking about. That includes the change from low-scale residential to moderate-scale residential, as it was just defined and illustrated by staff in the slides Bynum provided. We support the tone and the specific directives for the Carolee neighborhood. On page 14, it includes language such as ensure site-sensitive development, respect the area's historical qualities, create transition areas at neighborhoods. Where we struggle, there's a single line in the study that allows for up to 8 stories or 12 stories with significant public benefit. I think what we see is this statement is at odds with the definition of moderate scale residential, as Bynum just presented to y'all. The result is being felt in a current rezoning that is trying to maximize that 12-story envelope, despite being at odds with the intent of moderate scale residential and all of these things we just talked about. Site-sensitive development, respect the area's historical qualities, create transition areas. So I'd just like this group and the City Council to look at that single line in the study of up to 12 stories or 12 stories with significant public benefit and see if it's in alignment with all the other language of the study, which seems to contradict. Thank you.
Thank you. Then, yeah, one more there. Yep. Oh, yeah.
Hello, Michael Rudden. I live on Maywood Ave on the west side of South Saunders, like Jeff. So just a couple comments. I think that the Dix Edge study, there was a very rosy picture painted about like community engagement and surveys and things like that. I do want to point out, and just a couple things that kind of get me a little bit, is even in the presentation we were shown today, they talk about high density residential. They show like 4 or 5 story buildings, right? The survey asked, would you be okay with 5 stories along Maywood Ave? Right? Then the final report recommends 8 stories or 12 with significant public benefit. So, and next to pictures of 5-story residential. So I would say I think it's a little bit disingenuous to talk about allowing such big scale without bringing renders and illustrations in line with that. By and large, I agree with everything Jeff said in that respecting, transition zones and the character of the neighborhood is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had one here and then one there, and then I think that was everyone. Yeah, Bob.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Look, I think it's hard to know how an area study will translate to the future development of a site, but in this case, I think you have pretty good evidence of what will happen. The gentrification of this area is already well underway, and the affordable housing, while it's talked about at various points in the study, it's never made clear how that will be achieved. And the only specific offering of affordable housing is that zoning case. The comprehensive plan amendment says, well, we need more housing at the 30% AMI level, but we also need it at the 100% plus market rate level. And what we're going to do is we're going to have more market rate housing, and that's going to somehow address both problems. That's what the comprehensive plan amendment says. The recommendations for the future land use map are all upzoning lots. Upzone this lot, upzone that lot. The form and function map is like a preliminary further upzoning to 8 stories or 12 with public benefits completely undefined, or 14 stories up to 20 with public benefits, again, undefined. And the public benefits are not defined, and the process for defining public benefits is not defined. The best idea in this study comes to you 10 years late. It is the idea of a model public benefits agreement that would accompany any rezoning request. And it would contain the public benefits that the city needs. That should have been done 10 years ago, should have been done 3 years ago. It needs to be done now. And until it's done, rezonings will sail through with vague or no public benefits offered as conditions, and we will see the further gentrification of this area and lower income housing driven out. As someone said, the fact that a 1-story house was torn down and replaced by a 2-story house will not be helped by rezoning the property to 3 stories or 5 stories. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Over here.
Hello, I'm just testing this. Okay. So I'm here as a proxy / representative for Wake County Housing Justice Coalition, and I'm here to speak on the Dix Edge study. So a few things that I guess I'll just bullet point it out. One, in the study, the report shows that Dix Edge has a stable African American population, making up 46.4% of total residents in 2010 and 46.1% in 2020. Yet in most recent survey from the city, over 75% of the respondents were white and only 14% were Black or African American. Therefore, the survey missed 32.4% of African American voices. At least 42% of the respondents were those with an annual household income of $118,000 or greater. This is not an accurate reflection of the demographic of people who currently live in the Dix Edge area, which consists of Raleigh, Fuller Heights, Wheeler Crossing, Carolina Pines, Wheeler Park, Walnut Terrace, and Gateway Park. For example, information gathered from an interactive map on citydata.com reflects that the Carolina Pines and Fuller Heights neighborhoods have a median income of $37,381, to whom housing at 60% AMI will not be affordable. Felt like that was pretty strong of a reason to, I personally would not move forward. But anyways, other bullet points to make note of is a call for a fair housing board to be established and be a part of the process. I guess apparently there has been engagement with people on the buses, but not necessarily in more relevant communities, such as folks in low-income housing and public housing. As well as on the report, page 60, there were notes about education materials. I guess the question becomes, how has the city done this, and how is the city ensuring public housing, or rather folks in public housing, are not being displaced? So those are all my notes today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Okay. I know we're going over time a little bit, so I just want to see if our team still has time to finish some motions out. Okay. Everyone good?
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Yeah, please.
The first one's for staff and the survey for the Dix Edge study. Did you survey property on the other side of I-40? Because that's where Carolina Pines and everything. Did y'all go to the other side of I-40?
We did, that was part of the study area.
Okay.
I remember there's a piece down on the south side of 40,
Right.
west of Saunders.
Okay. My other question for staff was, this is switching off of Dix, but to the rezoning, since they were both done. Did downstream flooding, did we look into that and the impact of any development this is development will have?
I'm going to defer to Wayne Miles.
He's coming.
So the question was, did we do a downstream impact study, sir? No, we have not done that at that time. That would be something, should the council desire to move forward, could be a condition to add that would be done.
Okay.
And that because there are mitigating measures that we could incorporate into the development to keep the impacts to no impact, similar to other developments that have been through the rezoning process lately.
Okay. And my other question, my last question as well, Wayne, is actually for you. They, in this letter, this packet, it mentions Barbara Dahl. And I know she came to our meeting in January and sent us an email. Have you all had any conversations with her? Because I know when we did our another big zoning case, there was a gentleman named Chris that we talked to that PEJ brought in. But
Chris Bass.
Yeah. But did anyone talk to Barbara Dahl? Can compare her notes to what we have to see if there's any alignment?
We have not specifically discussed that letter that you wrote, no, sir. But
Okay.
we'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, I think regardless of the outcome of this, if you all could follow up and do that, I would. And then just an update, that would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
That's all I have.
Well, I know we have to decide what our next steps are, but whether this stays in committee or goes back to the council table, could I just ask staff to follow up with that demographic information from the surveys?
We'll do that. Yeah, thank you. I made a note earlier.
The last commenter actually brought up something that I had in my notes when I was going through it. It was specifically about policy on page 60, where it says improve homeowner and renter education awareness regarding future displacement concerns. One of the actions was prepare digital hard copy information and materials to hand out to Dix Edge property homeowners and renters to warn them of predatory real estate practices related to the selling of their homes to investors and developers or receiving an eviction notice. Is that something that happened or could happen? Do we need to put funding or action into that?
I'll try to take this. I don't think we have anybody here from Housing and Neighborhoods. So again, you did receive an update on the Public Project Community Support Fund. That was part of the aims of those third-party contracts that they were looking for community partners. So I think you approved 3 contracts. I think they were going back out with another solicitation. Again, that's a pilot program. We can certainly do an inventory of other programs and support, including the Campbell legal aid and other kinds of programs that are meant to provide community support. So I think there are some existing programs, and then also intent to increase both financial support and city support for some of those. We can certainly provide a summary of what exists now, and then again, you will be getting an update on the Public Project Community Support Fund.
And I was going to say real quick, I know on the previous case, last council cycle, Rochester Heights and Bitmore Hills, and partnering with, I think PEJ as well as St. Ambrose, they provided some information to people in the community about predatory lending. And I know staff has some information already on hand, because I know the Fair Housing Board at one time had that work, because I used to be their liaison So that's how I know about that.
Awesome. I know it's something that was listed as something the city can do, so I just want to make sure that we're like doing our part on education. I think education is such a missed piece in the political engagement process. So I just wanted to like note that. Thank you, last person, for bringing that up because I had that in my notes. And then I guess I had a question around AX 3.6. Hold on, not that one. AH 3.3, smaller apartments for affordability. Do we have a standard on what families need in affordable housing or like a benchmark? I know affordability is often related to like actual price, related to like the size of something, but I think there's like multiple families or families in that have like a husband, wife, 2 kids, maybe 3.
It's dependent. I mean, I know from previous conversations, depending on housing, family size, depending on income. I think those are the top 2 pillars. But as far as I guess that deep conversation about what families need, I don't think that was ever done. But that's an interesting conversation because what my family may need and what Megan's family may need may be different.
Right.
So
I just want to make sure that like we're hitting the affordability for what people who have families need affordability for. Because when I think about the affordability that's happening in like North Hills, for example, it's like 1,500, 600 square foot apartments. It's like I have no family, but maybe not so much if I had a husband and a kid or like something like that, and I still needed affordable housing. So I just wanted to like.
So our neighborhood revitalization project that was done at East College Park may be a good example of that, where it was geared towards first-time home buyers, that the city partnered, where it had a cap on the price of the homes, even the market rate. But most people don't realize we actually put a cap on the market rate. So when you're driving down the street, you can't see the difference between an affordable house and a market rate house. But that's through the neighborhood revitalization project that we did in East College Park.
So, Councilmember, we do have Erica Brand here. We can follow up with a report. I think your question is in the city's policies about the projects that we fund, what we require in terms of size and unit mixing. Is that what the question is?
I think affordable housing gets like this broad paintbrush, and I just want to make sure that it's like hitting like the range of what people need and affordability for like their families or their lifestyles, especially in this area.
Yeah, I'll just say, kind of in the affordable housing field, there are sort of standards. I would point to like housing authorities have requirements for voucher holders depending on family size, how many bedrooms a unit has to have to be considered livable and that kind of thing. To the point on kind of city policy, East College Park and kind of city-sponsored redevelopment projects, that is a consideration that is taken kind of at a project level. I don't think there's like a citywide standard, but when we're doing particular projects, that is something that is considered, yeah.
Thanks, Erica.
And I guess to supplement that, again, there were several choices in terms of the city-owned parcel here, which is what makes this unique, is that the city already owns and controls that parcel, and the council would be in a decision-making position in terms of the scope of any redevelopment and approval of any redevelopment. Certainly, when we did like the disposition of Moore Square that I think you've heard a little bit about, we left that kind of open in terms of responses from the development community in terms of proposing a mix. If the council chose to develop this site as affordable housing, either under the current zoning or a new zoning, we certainly would have more conversations with the council about your policy goals. Because we could certainly load into a solicitation more specific policy goals that we expected a developer to meet in terms of either income targeting, unit type, or some of the things that have been discussed here in terms of additional green infrastructure or other kinds of green space or other public. Ultimately, we're unique because you would be the developer and you'd be identifying what the development goals would be in any solicitation and in any contract for development. Because I think the recommendation, particularly in affordable housing, is that the city would continue to own the underlying land. Is that helpful?
I just want to thank everyone for being here, staff for all the work you've done on both of the proposals, the Dix Edge study, this particular rezoning case, and all of the residents that have come who really care about this particular area. I would like to put a motion forward for our committee. My understanding is then it would be a recommendation that would go back to council at our March 7th meeting. Is that correct, Robin?
Yes, it's probably best if you just do them one at a time,
Okay.
including the one that's still here. So with respect to the Dix study, do you want to refer it back to council for the March 7th meeting?
Can I start with the rezoning case?
Sure.
Okay. With this rezoning case, my motion is that we do not rezone Site 1 or Site 3. I would like to keep them in the future land use map, so that would also be a shift in the Dix Edge study map. So right now, they are listed along Fayetteville Street as urban corridor, and I'd like to keep that as green open space. I realize that might be three things at once. I don't know if
And
you want me to
that's
separate them.
okay. And that it returned to council. Do you want to, now you refer it out during the day. Do you want to set it back to hearing during the night?
Sure, that's fine.
Just, okay.
If we have time on the schedule, March 7th.
Tansy, you good with that?
Well, we have to set it.
Oh,
Or it's in the middle of the public hearing.
Yeah.
So, but before you need to report it out during the report of the committees.
okay.
Yeah, I
So
just want to
during the
pause
day.
and look at planning. I think procedurally that is what would happen during the day meeting. It would be reported out, and I think it would be just a question of where the public hearing would show on the agenda.
That's exactly right, Deputy City Manager. I'm looking to Bynum for a recap of the caseload that we have on that evening, which would be the only consideration I want council to have before setting that date. I think it's pretty full, but this is open. It doesn't have to be re-advertised, so there wouldn't be any logistical issues with getting that scheduled.
Right, so we have another area plan public hearing. The Wakefield Small Area Plan is scheduled for public hearing in the evening on the 7th. And then there are 3, 6, 7 rezoning items.
What would be our next date available by now?
The 21st, and then you have, there are only 5 rezonings that afternoon. There's some annexations, but those are usually quicker.
You can also do the recommendation and then decide on when you're going to resume it when you report it out on March 7th.
That's right.
Okay, that's fine.
But I would put that in the motion to say you're going to report it out, and at that time, you're going to announce when the public hearing will resume. Now, if you're going to do it on the 7th, you might as well do it, because that way people will know that they need to be there on the 7th. If you're going to delay it, you may want to wait, just if that makes sense.
Okay, I think we'll wait until the 7th, because I don't think we're going to do it the night of the 7th. But just for this motion, do I have a second? Do I need to say that in more detail?
Okay, let me just restate it for
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
You're recommending denial of the rezoning and that the comprehensive plan designations for the property remain the same, okay? And that it be reported out to the full council on March 7th, and that the resumption of the public hearing will be voted on by council on that date.
Correct, thank you.
Yeah.
And then all in favor?
Before we vote, I just want to say something. I'm going to vote in support of the motion. But I just want to put the thing about affordable housing. We just have to keep that on the forefront as we look at a lot of things and find that balance, because here is about a balance. But we also have to keep that in mind with other cases as well. It's about a balance. But for reasons that I have, I will support this motion.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, so it's 4-0.
Oh, and Councilmember Harrison, and that is with the decision that you will set it for a date later than March 7th once you get there, just so people know.
Correct. Let's see. I really appreciate the conversation about affordable housing writ large. I think that's something that, especially now that we have a new council, coming together and hearing what has worked, where you've seen good examples, what we can do, new ideas. That I think some of that conversation was happening today, and I really appreciate folks bringing those ideas to the forefront. For me, the Dix Edge study, I do think it has just an array of really great ideas out there. I think what we heard in some of the recommendations is that they don't end up necessarily living in the comp plan. They go into other areas of our city strategies, our city efforts. Some of the recommendations there, like the synthetic TIF is not currently in play. So I think that conversation that we had is an opportunity for us to consider ongoing what we want to do. Personally, I'm okay going forward with the Dix Edge study as is with the affordable housing recommendations, with the idea that we continue the conversation and we build these into actual policy ideas with teeth. So I'm just putting that out. That's where I'm at. I guess I'll make the motion to approve the Dix Edge study with, again, that amendment on the urban corridor, removing that along Fayetteville Street. I don't know if there's a second or if anyone else wants to get in there. And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so it's 3-0.
And you're going to report that out at the March 7th meeting, and then you've got to
3-1, yes, sir.
you got to finish up the public hearing too.
Okay.
So do you want to report that out and have the hearing on March 7th, or do what you did the last time?
If we had the hearing on March 7th, it would have to be at night? Or, okay, let's we'll decide the date then. So it'll be for a future date.
Okay, so the motion is to report it out on March 7th and then to have it at a future date determined by the council on March 7th.
Yep.
So go ahead and make that motion.
I make that motion. Okay.
Second.
Thank you.
Vote.
Oh.
Wait, what is this one for?
It's
Okay.
the same thing we said before. We're still talking about Dix Edge study.
Yeah, we're talking about, okay, you made the motion, you seconded it, now everybody vote.
And it's 3-1.
Okay.
Okay. And then there's one more. There is a zoning case that we didn't get a chance to talk about. That's the Lake Wheeler case. And so I guess our options are we hold this into committee to talk about at our next committee meeting, or we send it back to council with no recommendation. Those are the two options I see, since we didn't talk about it. Does anyone have thoughts on that one first?
This is in your district, so what's your recommendation?
I think we should continue it.
Let's see. We're gonna get Dix Edge study. Won't be till the end of March.
I thought we moved that back to council.
Yeah. We can move it back to
You moved it back. You'll report that out on March 7th, and you'll consider a hearing date. It sounds like potentially of March 21st. Your next regularly scheduled Growth and Natural Resources Committee meeting would be March 28th.
So for the last rezoning case that we didn't get to hear, this is what you're considering moving back to council.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to keep it on committee or?
I'm fine moving it back to council, as long as we have the Dix Edge study figured out by the time council gets to it. That's fine, because the dates all take a while. So if we move it back to council, basically that would be the recommendation for March 7th, and then we'd have a date to be determined. So it wouldn't come back to us until later March or early April to council.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Why did you move it to? Because I think you motioned to have it moved to Growth and Natural Resources. Why? What was the reasoning?
To get Dix Edge study figured out. So to me, Dix Edge study needed to be understood before we would adopt or approve any rezoning cases in the area. So that's my thinking. Okay.
So basically, what I'm hearing is motion to refer it out back to council to set the date for the hearing, and we can set that date after we set the date for the Dix Edge study.
Correct. Gotcha. That's the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that's 4-0. And as far as I know, that's all the business today of the GNR committee.
Great job. I'm glad to have a council and we're talking to each other. Great job.
Thanks, Corey. Thank you.